Continuing my testing of all the new ridelines coming out of D-BT08, I've got Shojodoji here. Very intriguing card that has a resource loop between the soul, bind zone, and board between its two effects to also enable some control on your opponent's side that gets around targeting, as well as generating a fourth attack that gains some power if your opponent's also at grade 3. So pretty powerful card, does a lot here, and has a lot of moving pieces that I think the support cards can really take advantage of to net some great offensive pressure as well as value. For the ride line, I run the grade 0 Shojodoji. You can really run whatever starter, I just chose to run this one for thematic reasons. For the grade 1, I won Shojodoji because I think it just sets up what the deck wants to do the best. Being able to thin 2 stealth normal units off of the top 5 is phenomenal. Deck thinning is deck winning, but also being able to put one into soul is great because this deck does use a lot of soul, so anytime we can increase it, we definitely want to. And sets one up to bind zone, which is great to get one of our stealth cards that we want to call off the Shojodoji's ability in their ASAP, or just other cards that can combo off from the bind zone. This one also has the added benefit of when it is in the bind zone to Soul Blast 1 to call it out, so a free +1 for a good booster seems really great, especially since this is a stealth card, meaning it can be bound by Shojodoji's ability and it will be in the soul automatically because we're running the ride line. The grade 2 Shojodoji also works very similar and just facilitates what the deck wants to do very well, being able to thin out 2 stealth normal units from the top 5 again, deck thinning is deck winning, and being able to put one into soul, same thing as the grade 1 applies for this one. In addition, instead of binding one, it gets to call the other stealth card you reveal to rearguard circle for some early aggression, just better numbers, whether it be another attacker, a booster to make it harder for your opponent to guard your Vanguard swing. Seems powerful to me, and it's got the added bonus of that same act ability from bind zone to Soul Blast 1 to call it. So just a free attacker, really great stealth, so you can bind off of Shojodoji's ability. And I definitely see myself binding the grade 1 and grade 2 Shojodoji from the ride line, and then Soul Blasting 2 to be able to create an 18k column on my first grade 3 turn. Get those 2 units out there to put to soul to then call something really, really powerful seeming. Moving on to the main deck, I run 3 copies of Persona Ride because Persona Ride is just great, being able to create better numbers, especially since a lot of these stealth cards do not create great numbers on their own, unless specifically called off of Shojodoji's ability. I also run Stealth Dragon Unprecedented. This is going to be my main called target for 2 reasons. 1, really cheap draw card. Soul Blast 1, great. Just draw is always very, very nice to draw into Persona Rides, PGs, shield value, whatever you need to better survive your opponent's turn and set yourself up for your next turn. It also gains 10,000 power just by doing what Shojodoji wants to do. So, of note, it's only after you use Shojodoji's ability that this effect will trigger. So it's, again, that's the reason why it's our main call target. Just creates even better numbers. 23k on first grade 3 turn, 33k off of Shojodoji's ability if your opponent's already at grade 3, and 43 under Persona Ride, really powerful attacker here. Also fun interaction, this can be called off the grade 2 to get the draw. Moving over to the grade 2s, I run 4 Jakumetsu Arcs, gains 5k when placed from bind zone, making it a decent backup call from bind zone if we don't have the Unprecedented set up. More importantly, want to use this as the other attacker because for a cost of Soul Blast, you get to take one of the cards from your opponent's bind zone and put it on the bottom of the deck. Bottom of the deck is a phenomenal place to put it, as a lot of decks will struggle to be able to get that card back from there, and it's really cheap, but also just gets rid of cards that we don't want our opponent to have back from bind zone, such as powerful on-place effects or just generally powerful cards that enable what your opponent wants to do. So having a card like this that can permanently get rid of it is, I think, is great to have and definitely an include in the deck. Moving over to the grade 1s, I run 3 copies of the grade 1 Shojodoji, and this is just to maximize the number of good cards to put in the bind zone off of the top 5 search for the ride line copy of it. Just being able to put one of these in the bind zone means that I can choose to put another one other than the grade 1 Shojodoji in with the grade 3 Shojodoji's ability and still be able to call the grade 1 and grade 2 to create the 18k column. Just, yeah, I want to be able to maximize my use of the bind zone, and this card has a really great skill, and at worst, I just draw into a 5k shield or an 8k booster if necessary. I run 3 of the Reija Spear here. This is just to really round out deck space, and just Soul Charge seems necessary for this deck because of all the Soul Blast costs, and be able to gain 2k can be relevant to make great numbers with the Vanguard in particular, or if you have an Unprecedented on rearguard circle to swing with. Don't know how much that will pop up, mostly there for the Vanguard booster, but any extra Soul Blast cost seems good. And of course, at worst, if we ends up in our bind zone and we call it, it does make itself a 10k. Not too relevant outside the first grade 3 turn, but can be relevant maybe if against Majesty Lord Blaster. And again, just extra Soul Charge to set up for more Soul Blasting costs for our various units for future turns. Yeah, I think this is a good include to round out deck space. I run 4 copies of the Fork Tail. This is an older card that originally worked with Tamayura, but it does work with this deck phenomenally. Being able to thin out another stealth card from the deck seems good, and be able to put a soul for our Soul Blast cost, or setting up for great cards to put to bind zone with the Great Shojodoji's ability, makes this one, in my opinion, an obvious inclusion in the deck. 4 copies of Komon here. This card is, I'm curious to see how it performs because it only works when placed from hand, so it's not a great target to bind and then call off of, but we also have the option to just put to Soul Blast. But if we ever have it in hand and get the chance to call it down, we can either get rid of another one of my opponent's cards for a counterblast cost, so a bit more expensive, but the only other thing that uses counterblast in this deck is the Great Shojodoji. Or we can always opt to just build out a board with this card with some extra cards in Bind Zone, which I do think we will accumulate over the course of the game. Just makes this card really flexible, and honestly, we don't have that many other phenomenal stealth cards. There's other things that we can definitely try out here, but I wanted to try out the new cards, so I opted to put this card in. Finally, round out the grade 1s, 3 Twin Buckler Dragon. While we do have a stealth PG, there's no way to really get into hand, so I see no reason to run it, especially since we don't really want to bind it or put it to Soul either. So Rai run a PG that has less utility than the Twin Buckler when it doesn't necessarily synergize with our deck. And of course, only 3 PGs because I do run the Order PG, the Elementaria Sanctitude, because this is not a triple drive deck. There's no reason not to run this card, bypassing guard restricts, possibly a free PG against the triple drive decks. Yeah, this one is pretty self-explanatory. The other order I run is the Gradius Gradale, and that's just because it's a 4th copy of Persona Ride, gets some extra power since this deck does not create that great of numbers outside of the Unprecedented call off of the Shojodoji. So again, this one just seems pretty obvious, especially since we're not trying to run other orders here. We'll have no problem getting this card in whenever we choose not to Persona Ride or choose to hold the Persona Ride to opting to play this card. Finally, for the trigger lineup, got 8 crit, 3 draw, 4 heal, 1 OT. Do run the effect Chris just in case we need to get some extra soul. I don't know how too relevant it will be, but I just opted to play this one, and we'll see. Easy to switch out for 5Ks if we just want the numbers. 3 draws because the attack pattern of this deck, I think, draws works just fine, and it's extra pieces, extra digging for Persona Ride, shield, PGs, and it's just a phenomenal check defensively to possibly get more cards to help us turn a losing scenario we don't have enough cards to guard with to a winning scenario. 4 of just the 15k heals because I don't really know what I'm going to face up against, so I'd rather just have the higher shield value, and if I see that I'm facing against particular decks, I can easily switch it out for the effect heals. And finally, 1 Dragveta, because Dragveta is Dragveta. Really powerful card, and it can allow us to use Shojodoji's ability twice if we do check it. So with the deck list out of the way, let's get right into the games. Getting into the first game here, I am going second against Youthberg. Very scary since Youthberg is one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the meta currently, and it's testing out the new Dobreg card coming out D-BT09 as well. So with this hand, I just choose to keep Persona Ride and Jakumetsu Arcs. That way I have a higher chance of finding stealth cards off the grade 1, grade 2 Shojodoji. Just like here, bind Jakumetsu Arcs to call later if I don't get an Unprecedented. Reija Spear could just go to Soul Blast out later. My hand's looking quite nice. Whiff a here, but so does my opponent. But still, it's cards to guard in hand, 2 PGs, Komon if I need to call something for Bind Zone or get rid of one of my opponent's cards from their Bind Zone, and Forktail to continue thinning the deck. My opponent opts to go aggressive here, getting the Schnagel, getting a 3rd Gust in hand. Really powerful there. Overture checks the Tempest. So here my opponent doesn't really have too much to guard with. And unfortunately, I do whiff the heal here. I choose to guard Vanguard just in case he checks triggers to take that second column. So 2 heals whiffed here. Kind of hurts. I discard the Komon because I figured it would be the least useful of the bunch. I'll discuss that more later and get 2 Unprecedents here. So get 1 to Soul to bind next turn if I so choose to, and 1 to call out to Soul Blast to get a draw into another PG. So I am definitely not going anywhere in this matchup anytime soon as long as I got PGs to guard with. Here I'm just debating whether to call the Forktail and where to call the Forktail, just because I could put it behind Vanguard, make that column better, but that doesn't necessarily help the Unprecedented, and I also wanted to possibly save it for Jakumetsu Arcs, but here I just decide to throw it behind the Unprecedented, and I Soul Charge another Unprecedented. Really great to set up 2 here. Drive check the Forktail, and my opponent checks 2 PGs, so that's really hurting my opponent from being able to guard here. Though I really can't guard here, but I'm only at 1 damage, so I'm not too worried here. Here just goes Youthberg discarding, I believe it was, I wasn't keeping track of it, but adds back the Schneisel, but then use it right away. I don't know why he's insisting on keeping all these Revel forms here, but sets up the Dobreg here with the Youthberg here, just starts going on the offensive here. I choose to take this one since I don't really have a great way to guard it, and I do get reward by checking that draw trigger here to more easily guard stuff and draw into a grade 1 here, so it's still not great for guarding, but still I can take stuff, and now Dobreg cannot hit unless, well, now Dobreg just can't hit. So here I choose to use that grade 1 Shojodoji to easily block that because it's got no drive checks because of no Sequana. And I just take this one because I really didn't want to use a PG here. Check a PG, but I got plenty of it, so that is perfectly fine. Move over to my turn here. I just opt to discard the crit trigger because I do want to call down this Forktail here because I expect to bind the grade 2 Shojodoji as well as the Unprecedented set for a really powerful swing. Not really wanting to call the Jakumetsu Arcs because Unprecedented just makes better numbers. So here I call the Jakumetsu Arcs, call the Forktail to give support to the grade 2 that I'll call once I bind it, just because it it wouldn't hit numbers otherwise. And I really want to go Vanguard here, hoping my opponent's hand isn't too beefy, and it really isn't. So here I opt to bind. It's supposed to be the Dobreak here. My opponent, I think, thought that he could choose, or they could choose, but turns out this, well, Shojodoji lets you choose the rearguard circles. It's the order that lets your opponent choose. So just get that corrected here real quick. Getting rid of his 2 intercepts seems really powerful here, and I can just get rid of the Dobreak with the Jakumetsu arcs because I think it's more of a threat than the Schneisel. So, yep, calling the grade 2 Shojodoji here, making an 18k call. My opponent 15k guards it. Using the grade 1 Shojodoji to put them both in to call the Unpresident. It's going to be swinging for 33k, and I get to draw a card. So here my opponent just drops a 15k shield, and on my drive checks, I will see, draw. Forktail's really nice, but Jakumetsu arcs and Unpresident, not great drive checks here overall, but hey, it just means that I'm more likely to check triggers both on the 1 defense check I can take, and also to check triggers next turn. So here, I send the Dobreak to the bottom with the Jakumetsu arc. Opponent chooses to take that one, not wanting to use the over trigger, and go to 5 damage. That way he can try to deny me another heal and get more heals off himself. And yeah, also Unpresident's just also really big. So here, my opponent gets to add back the Schneisel, recall it to use its skill to search out a Rebel form, misses, but gets the 5k. So I'm really happy I hit the Dobreak here because that was going to be a much scary attack here. Uses the other Schneisel here, so definitely opting to go for a Gust turn, has the Sequan to make it a double or a twin drive. Really powerful here, swings for 33k. I just used the order PG, no reason to keep it. Youthberg doesn't really run guard restrict anymore. So here it just goes for that exact play. Gust, discarding Tempest, doesn't need it. Of course, use the Quanta first to get the twin drive. Swings Schneisel here. Here, I choose to take it, figuring that I don't have the best card. I'm going to mostly use the PG. So I do whiff another heal here. No heals hit, but 23k, not too bad. And then swings here, though, I am just kind of forced to guard the PGs. If I had more triggers in hand, like I checked last turn, it would have been better. And here, draw into a grade 1 Shojodoji. Hey, more cards to call. Crit trigger. They're finally starting to see my triggers. So of note at this point, once I do all this, so that's another soul charge there, I counted it, and my should have 10 triggers left in deck right now. And so I'm most likely going to check something come my twin drive. So I get to call the grade 1 Shojodoji, then another card, and here just swing 31. My opponent guards with 20. Shojodoji, throw it to soul, gets called the Unpresident, and I get a draw here. So I get the Soul Blast 1 draw. Again, come on. So yeah, now 10, 6, but I hit 2 non-triggers here. If I had only hit a crit trigger, that would have been great. He's able to guard the Jakumetsu arcs. I think I'm out of soul to use it. No, I had soul. I think I just opted not to use it, or honestly, I might have just forgotten. Probably could have definitely, well, I shouldn't say definitely sent it. Oh, I did use it because I only had the Schneisel back and then drew into the Dobreak here. Here, just not Persona Rising, discarding to grab the Wayward Therapy Angel, really strong here. And here it's looking a bit scary. I don't have the best guard in hand. Not too great here, so swings Youthberg, and here I just choose to really drop the 15k because it is really strong, and he won't be able to at least twin drive next turn. So here, Wayward Therapy, Schneisel, so my opponent's not checking any triggers, and ends up going for the Gust here, of course. So yeah, 1 crit. I just wanted to check that one. 1 crit. There was the second one. So yeah, I had so many crits left in deck. I think I would have had 6 left in deck. But here, just being able to go Gust, discard Wayward Therapy, just make a big column, just kind of maximizing the power. Swing Schneisel here to give Vanguard that plus 5,000. So here I am forced to just call down 15k shield and then just hope for heals. I have 1 heal left and over trigger, but there's that final crit that I needed last turn. And that is the end of game 1. I think I just really got unlucky with the trigger luck there. The fact that, I mean, if we just... Oh, it won't even let me look at the end of the game. The fact that I had 10 triggers left in deck and I just didn't see them when all I needed was a crit trigger and most of my deck was, the triggers were crits. Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate. But let's move on to game 2. Moving over to game 2 here, I am going first and I get debating here whether I keep some of these, but I end up just kind of throwing everything except the Forktail because Forktail can filter out my deck, and I really just want to see the Unpresident go to Soul or Bind Zone. So here, draw the Jakumetsu arcs. I opt to discard draw triggers. I really want to keep those 2 to build a board, and I do find the Unpresident and the Reija Spear, so that's going straight to Bind Zone. Reija Spear to be Soul Blasted out later. Passing it over to my opponent, discards the Schneisel, goes into just standard plays, swings, whiffs another heal, and Unpresident goes to damage zone, but I'm not too worried about that. Draw into another Jakumetsu arc. Don't really need it, so I just discard it, adding the grade 1 and grade 2 Shojodoji, or grade 1 Shojodoji and the Reija Spear. Opt to put Shojodoji in Soul because it's more used there. Reija Spear unfortunately does not get its effect off here, but oh well. Here, call Forktail behind Vanguard because I figured I could swing 8 and then 18 to Vanguard. Does opt to guard it here, and I do check heal, so that was the optimal attack pattern here. And my opponent, so I do heal down, and my opponent checks a Tempest. So decent start here for sure. And here he just ends up swinging Youth, doesn't really call anything, not playing into my Shojodoji here. Do check PG here. That's fine. Discard Reija Spear because I figured I'm going to build a board. No problem this turn. So here, go call Jakumetsu Arcs, bind those two. No avail, but really I just wanted to get them to bind zone to be able to build a board here by soul blasting some cards. Just go on the offensive here. I figured that I'm going first. Let's take advantage of it to try to beat Youth and hopefully capitalize on them might not having a good hand. Here he checks a heal. Kind of hurts, but it's fine. I'll just call it the Unprecedented. It can still hit over with its own skill. Get to Soul Blast 1 to draw a card. Another PG here. Komon and into crit trigger. That's phenomenal. But unfortunately checks another heal here, so this offensive really wasn't doing much, and he chooses to take it. So only at 3 damage. If he just didn't check those heals, it would have been so much better, but it is what it is. He rides into his Youthberg, adds back the Tempest, using Wayward Therapy Angel's skill to start building a board. He's got plenty of those. Youthberg skill, discard Wayward Therapy, gets to check top 3, and also get to call something out. So he gets Dobreg, really powerful here, and the Wayward Therapy just building up a massive board, really strong. Calls the Sequana over here, which I find interesting, though probably didn't want to risk throwing more onto the board than he needed to, hence why not calling the Sequana to the back row, but also does not have much shield value with doubled Gust and a Tempest. So here's swinging for 20 Jakumetsu Arcs. I just let it go, figuring I can probably build back a board. I'm low on soul. I don't really need it. Here, just swings Vanguard. I block it because it's an easy guard. Goes Tempest, gets to reveal 2, throws back the Reija Spear, just kind of breaking down my columns. Really good choice there by my opponent. Of course, gets the Sequana to give Vanguard the extra crit, so he can swing 23k here. I believe I no guard because I see no reason to guard. I'm at 1 damage. No trigger. Check a draw. Get a draw. Crit trigger here. Seeing all my triggers this game. And opts to swing rear guard. Here I just want to protect it because I really don't have a good hand to guard stuff. And unfortunately, since he didn't swing Vanguard, I don't have access to the Komon here, which kind of hurts. Unfortunately, though, I can easily call back one of the Shoujodojis off it and set up the Unprecedented, and that's exactly what I do here. Get rid of the Dobreg and the Wayward Therapy, and I get to, unfortunately, since I let the Jakumetsu Arcs go, in hindsight, I probably should have guarded it because I had the cards in hand too. I was being overly cautious with guarding because I could have got the Jakumetsu Arcs, get rid of the Dobreg here, and just set up overall a better board, especially since I had so many triggers. But this is only my second game with my deck. But here I opt to do for the double attack because I really want to keep the booster out on board and get the grade 2 Shojodoji into Soul, though I opt to ultimately Soul Blast it to draw 1, figuring I'm really not seeing too much, so I'll probably see more cards to guard and build a board, and I'm running low on Soul anyway. Do check a trigger here on the Vanguard swing, push him up to 5. Really nice here to kind of put pressure on next turn. If I can find that Persona Ride, which I was missing this turn, does get back with the Wayward Therapy and the Dobreg, so he can discard for Youthberg's ability and get the call back. So being able to reuse those cards, again, more reason why I probably should have saved the Jakumetsu Arcs in hindsight. So here, just being able to set up a really powerful board, 2 Wayward Therapies, really 3 Wayward Therapies, the other Sequana, and he still has 2 Sequanas in hand. He's got Gus, he's got Dobregs, looking really powerful here. 33, I opt to no guard it, I believe, because I'm at such low damage, and I can just check some defensive triggers to hopefully survive a bit better. Checks both Youthbergs here. So only taking 1 damage. I really like seeing that, and maybe take advantage of the fact that his hand is a lot of Youthbergs. Of course, I only really knew about 2 or 3 of them. So here he does check no cards to be able to bot deck anything, but still Persona Ride for next turn. Crit trigger to be able to block with. Not too bad for my opponent. Checks the other Youthberg here. So again, if I can just... No, Persona Ride goes away. But if I can just find a Persona Ride, put up a lot of pressure since he's on 5 damage still. Really want to do that. I opt to go up to 5 damage to make sure my heals are live. And all I need is Persona Ride by drawing to a PG. So my hand's so full. And that's even more why I was just like, man, I probably should have been protecting more of my rear guards here than I was, as being way too conservative and letting the game go out too long, and I just don't have the cards to finish it. And there's my Persona Ride. Like, this would have been such a great turn to do that if I put on the pressure. I just swing Vanguard, my opponent blocks it as he has to, and here he's just able to set up for a huge offensive swing, and he also gets to build up a even better hand, be able to filter out more of those Youthbergs, add more cards to hand. Really hurts there. I choose to take that one, figuring just try to check a defensive trigger to be able to more easily guard it. I don't get it. I've seen a lot of triggers. Makes sense here. So here goes Gust, forced to PG this one, of course. Checks front trigger into PG. Again, just more phenomenal cards to guard with. Goes Dobreg. I guard over trigger because it just is the optimal guard here. Again, drawing into 2 more triggers. It's so painful. And now I finally... Also, I ran out of Soul last turn to use Shojodoji's ability, which is why I only attacked twice as well. But here I'm able to start setting stuff up, and here I'm debating, like, do I call down a trigger or do I just try to outgrind my opponent? Because he's still at 5 damage, so I just opt to try to outgrind my opponent, keep a big hand size. Call the Unpresent. I choose not to use a skill, thinking I'll be able to survive next turn and try to build up a better board. But of course, my opponent can easily guard it. So he goes drive check, drive check. So hey, cards to build a board. Finally. a little late on that, and of course my opponent gets to add both those cards back to hand. So it just kind of goes all out with the Quana, the Dobrig, and just swings. And can't call the Wayward Therapy. I don't think he wants to dig deeper into his deck because it's a lot of triggers. So here I opt to make it a 2 to pass. It is a bit risky, and I think in hindsight I should have just gone no pass, though to be fair, those would have gone really beefy, so I might have not had the cards to guard. But honestly, I do think what I should have done there was gone, yeah, you can see here, so many triggers left. I probably should have just done no pass because I had so many cards here. I think I was just playing way too conservatively with my guard in this game, and that's what ultimately lost me it. But I also think it shows the other side of Shojodoji here, where I see all my triggers, but since we're filtering our deck out of so many stealth cards, if I don't value trying to keep them on board, then it might be hard to rebuild my board because of that, just more likely to draw triggers because I've been filtering. But with that being said, let's move on to game 3, because there's a game 3 despite it being a 2-0 right now. I figured it would just be fun, and after the game, I think it's totally worth showing you all. So moving over to game 3, I am going first again, and here get the Persona Ride in 2 PGs, though I only opt to keep 1 because I'd rather find more cards to build a board, just to try to rush my opponent down a bit more, and getting the grade 1 Shojodoji, Reija Spear, and Forktail is quite nice for that. Some great boosters here. So here check the Unpresident, which is great to bind, and the Jakumetsu Arcs to go to Soul if I ever need to bind it to call something, or just Soul Blast it. So here my opponent has 2 Persona Rise, Dobrik, Zaquana, and Tempest here. So definitely, and I called that out because I'm trying to bind it face up because I read something like Hold Shift to send face up, but I was able to flip it anyway. But anyway, swings, checks heal. That's my opponent keeps like missing, like blank checking those heals either on damage or drive check, which is kind of funny. Pure Go grade 2 Shojodoji. Only find 1, so it only goes to Soul, so I don't actually plus to board. That's like the only downside of this card is you have to put the Soul before you can call, so if you only find 1, you don't actually plus off of this, and then you're not plussing off the ride line. But here, I just choose to go offensively, call the Jakumetsu Arcs, the Forktail, and just swing, hit crit trigger. Really great to push my opponent early on, does check the front, but swinging my opponent blocks that heal. But still, 2-1 lead, not too bad. Here, with me going first. So here it goes into the youth. The reason I chose to call this was because last time he didn't aggress, so I figured it might be good to do that. But here he actually chooses to aggress, grabbing the Gust off of the Schneisel's ability, and does swing Jakumetsu Arcs. I choose to let it go, figuring that he's just going to swing into Jakumetsu Arc continually, so I'm getting a bit punished for aggressing a bit early. So I think that's another good point, maybe just better judging when to aggress, but then I block the Vanguard, take that one as a crit by draw, and get another Jakumetsu Arc, so never punished, I guess? So here I just use Shojodoji's ability, get rid of the intercepts, bind those 2, and then I just call them out to make an 18k column, as always, as that's a really powerful beginning of the game. First grade 3 turn play, call the Jakumetsu Arcs, swing a Vanguard for 18, he chooses to take it, swing grade, actually chooses to swing here first because I started to notice maybe sometimes checking triggers means that this column won't hit. Here I actually forget to use the ability. I should have done that, gotten rid of the Dobrig here, would have saved me some guard here, but here, calling out the Unpresident, getting a draw, some power, because I should have Soul. Yeah, oh yeah, I have Soul. So Soul Manager is definitely a big part of this deck that I am still trying to master here. So here it goes into the Youthberg, of course, and actually over-triggered help guard, Komon to help, not too bad here, another Unpresident in hand. So here he just calls out good old Dobrig and Schneisel, and here's especially where I wish I had just gotten rid of the Dobrig here, because it would have forced my opponent to try to find it off the top 3. So, but is what it is. Swings with the Youthberg. I choose to no guard it, figuring this is unlikely he hits double critical. So he does check a heal here, being able to heal down, but unfortunate PG. So getting kind of accumulating some pieces there to help him guard. Goes into the Tempest, uses Tempest's ability, bounces the Forktail to the bottom of the deck. Better than my Intercept or my Unpresident, as you will see. So you're just being able to set up Tempest to swing with the drive check. Not too worried here, his numbers are pretty manageable. So here I choose to go over trigger over PG. Hits a critical trigger, glad I did guard that, has the Schneisel here gain a crit, so chooses to swing at the Jakumetsu Arcs. I let it go because I know I just need to make better numbers and try to finish it off next turn, especially here where I kind of have to just PG here, especially since I want to keep these to build a board. So here, draw another Komon, and here I go Shojodoji, and this play here I kind of wish I had a bit early, because here I can go Unpresident to set up the grade 1 Shojodoji, to be able to throw both of those into the bind zone, and of course use then the grade 1 Shojodoji to build a board. Now the Komon here is very interesting because I can actually get rid of both those cards in the bind zone. So here's where I'm saying I wish I had them the turn earlier, at least one of them, because I could have gotten rid of both cards. And I really feel like in these games, I'm undervaluing this card in particular here and the value it can bring to build my own board as well as my opponent's board, because I'm really not burning through all my counterblast, and I think it will alleviate some pressure on my soul, maybe not always using the grade 1 or grade 2 Shojodoji, as I think I'm putting an overemphasis on it. So here, just throwing the Dobrig to the bottom, Komon to throw the Schneisel. Arguably should have done it in the other order, but I don't think it will ever come up. too much, but I think technically I should have. So here, just swinging, he does take the damage, call the Unpresent, just trying to make the best numbers I can, hoping that his hand is not very great. But here, I feel like both my opponent and I got a pretty good roll for like luck-wise. It wasn't too luck-sacky this game. Here I check a heal, and I was quickly calculating. I end up just giving it here because he's at 5 damage. I just want to force as much guard out of my opponent's hand as possible. But I feel like this is a good example of a game where both of our decks are doing what we kind of want to. It's a bit of a low roll for my opponent because my opponent's not finding all of his pieces, but it's also not too bad because he is still seeing a lot of them. I think the only thing he's missing is like the Wayward Therapy. But I do force all but the Sequana out of hand. So a really good showing of the pressure this deck can put out when trying to close out the game with these Unpresidents here. It's just a bit unfortunate that it was just not enough, and my hand's not looking great, having drawn the Gradius Gradale, so I only have a 35k shield at my hands, and just looking at my opponent's hand, he can definitely do some nasty stuff. So I'm praying on some heals here, and I believe I still have 3 heals left in deck, so it's not the craziest thing as long as I don't whiff the first one here. So here, I just choose to, it's 33k, I choose to no guard it here, and he checks critical trigger and critical trigger. So I need to check 2 heals. If he only checked 1, there's a chance, but unfortunately I do not see it. But I do still think that was the right play because he could have just stacked triggers there, and I just needed the cards to guard Gus, which would have been a 23k attacker regardless. One away from the heal, so unfortunately did not able to pull that one out, but at the same time, I feel like this was a really good showing of what Shojodoji can do. So Youthberg was definitely a hard matchup here. I think there's a lot of variance as we saw with games 1 and 2, but again, I do think game 3 was a fantastic showing of what Shojodoji can do. I feel like it did what I kind of intended it to do, and it just was, I was against Youthberg, who had actually drew into a good hand to guard with, as opposed to getting a lot of cards that they couldn't use to guard with, and that's just how it is. And that's kind of what I expected from Shojodoji. It's a lot of fun. There's definitely a lot of potential here, but I definitely think it's a bit of a mess right now and really needs some more better support cards to really actualize the potential this deck has, as like Soul Resource is really, really tough. And I imagine a deck that isn't actually controlling my board like Youthberg can, it would be even harder because I got extra chances to call extra Fork Tails without overcalling and such. So my final review for this deck is it's definitely fun. It's definitely a deck that I think has a lot of potential moving forward with the support cards. But for right now, I think it's just a bit of a mess, at times too fair, a lot of variance. So it will be a blast to play, but don't expect to do too well with it. As for the deck build, I don't know if I would change too much. I think it was mostly just me playing the deck. I wasn't optimizing my soul correctly, putting too much of an emphasis on the grade 1 and grade 2 Shojodoji, and not enough emphasis on maybe properly utilizing my guard to keep my board intact and pushing more of an offensive pressure here, but also really not utilizing the Komon and the Jakumetsu arcs to keep my opponent off some of their offensive pieces. So I think most of the struggles in this game, outside of variance, was just me not optimally playing the deck and still trying to learn it. So at most, I would say maybe you could adjust some of the ratios here. Reija Spear really isn't doing too much, but at the same time, if you don't find your Fork Tails, it's still fine. It just needs a lot more testing. Again, this was only 3 games. You could even test with this order here. I chose not to run it just because it's really a -2 to force your opponent to temporarily -1. It does give you a soul, but then of course you're just kind of drawing back with the Unpresident, so I thought it was better just to try to loop 2 Unpresident over just trying to utilize this card. But of course you can always test this if you so choose to. With that being said, though, if you're also trying to build Shojodoji, share your ideas in the comments section down below. I'm really intrigued to see what people are testing, and I always think that sharing notes is the best way for all of us to improve, become better deck builders for both Shojodoji and just in general. And if you've been enjoying these series of videos where I test the brand new ridelines, please leave a like and consider subscribing and turn on the notification bell so you're notified when I upload more parts, as I still have to test Lukier and Minerva. And yeah, that'll be coming up real soon, so stay tuned for more content coming out real soon.